Member for Vancouver Fairview.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I was going to open my remarks by noting that it's becoming almost habitual that I'm following the member from Chilliwack Hope, and perhaps he was trying to foreclose that option with his comments. And I appreciate the enthusiasm of the member from Chilliwack Hope and in his speech in support of this bill, and I may refer from time to time to some of his comments about transparency in government and his experiences with both seeking and using information kept by government in other roles he's played at other times. Certainly he seems to have found that a useful enterprise, availing himself of the opportunities that should be there for the public to examine and peruse records of government activity, subject to hopefully some very limited exclusions. I also noted his thanking the current Minister for Technology, Innovation and Citizen Services for bringing this bill forward, as well as the former Minister and the current Minister of Advanced Education, who said on more than one occasion when I was questioning him in estimates or in the House that it was time for a modernization of various government acts with respect to record keeping. And I know, Honourable Speaker, I'm not allowed to use props in the House, but I have, just to inspire me in this speech, a copy of Fortune World with a picture of the current Minister of Advanced Education smiling up at me. I know that will keep me on track and focused on the many comments that he made in response to a number of questions at various times during his time as the Minister responsible for freedom of information and protection of privacy. Honourable Speaker, it is indeed time to modernize our approach to information management. Certainly digitizing records is arguably long overdue, but as many have pointed out, the wheels of government occasionally move slowly. I know the Minister of Transportation has pointed that out in response to statements I have made earlier and on other occasions. So the fact that transitioning to digitizing government records will begin this spring, assuming this bill passes, which I have no doubt it will, is a good thing. And the fact that it will take some time to do that is just something that I think we all live with and we have to live with. But it is important to note that despite the fact that perhaps we should have started digitizing records quite some time ago and we wouldn't be facing some of the archival problems we currently have, our current system of archiving government records is deficient and has been deficient and outdated for quite some time, and in particular this stems to a number of decisions made by this government that has essentially resulted in paper records not being properly archived for about 12 years now, and a system of record keeping that just doesn't work and has resulted in warehousing large amounts of paper, which makes it difficult, if not impossible from time to time, for freedom of information requests to be met, requests by members of the public or the media or the opposition who have a legitimate interest in examining the various records of government that pertain to either important policy decisions or from time to time pertain to questionable activities in government, and whether it's the failure to archive paper or more recently simply the failure of government to keep any records at all, or at least admit to keeping any records, we have seen interested members of the public, opposition members, the media, frustrated in attempting to figure out just what makes this government tick and on what basis certain decisions have been made. I'll use as perhaps the most recent example the supposedly extensive series of consultation on transportation on the Highway of Tears that was conducted by the Minister of Transportation, for which apparently there is not a single record anywhere in government that addresses what was put forward at those consultations, what people said at those consultations, whether there was any discussion back and forth in those consultations, whether there is a trend line in the submissions that were made by people who attended the consultations. I think the number of consultations were 18. Honourable Speaker, it defies credulity to believe that one of two things, I suppose, that either no records were kept whatsoever of these consultations because, well, who knows, Honourable Speaker, perhaps we're relying on some super sophisticated brain circuitry in the staff who attended these consultations. Maybe it's all stored on the minister's personal mental hard drive, or maybe the government just really didn't care what happened in the consultations. The point was to put on a show, and nobody really gave much concern to what was said. In any event, it does seem inappropriate that on an issue of such significance and import to people, particularly Aboriginal people in the North, whose families have seen and lived with tragedies for a couple of decades at least now, disappearances, situations in communities where there isn't sufficient transport, and young women hitchhike and far too often have disappeared or met an untimely death. It seems to me completely inappropriate that government should be able to offer no records whatsoever. Doesn't seem to me, or to members on this side of the House, to be a respectful or appropriate response to conduct and stand behind a consultation on what needs there are in the North, what needs there are to prevent future tragedies, and then have no record whatsoever of that consultation. I will confess, Honourable Speaker, that it just astounds me. So on the one hand, we have a bill, Bill 5, that proposes to modernize record keeping by digitizing it going into the future, but still leaves open the question of what should happen to the massive amounts of material that were not archived but warehoused by a body at arm's length removed from government, which then chose to cover its own costs to charge a fee back to ministries for any archiving. And in a time of great constraint and tightened budgets, ministries chose whether to save money or simply to avoid the archiving of material that would then be subject to freedom of information requests, to not pay the fee and therefore not see the records properly archived and be accessible. It's not good enough, Honourable Speaker. I know the Minister of Advanced Education, in response to some questions I asked in estimates in the very first session of this legislature that occurred after my election, I was questioning the Minister about oral record keeping, or the use of private emails for records or for conversations in government about different initiatives, and why those were not released when the Information and Privacy Commissioner had made it clear that it didn't matter if it was a private email. If it was to do with government business, it was to be considered government information that was covered by the Act. And the Minister responded, I wish I could give an absolutely precise quote, but the quote was something like, "I've made it clear to people, if it's written down on the bottom of their shoe, it is government information and it's subject to the Act." Well, apparently, Honourable Speaker, the latest way this government has chosen to avoid requests for information is simply to not keep any records at all, although how one can conduct government business without keeping records, as I said, strains credulity, astounds me, seems totally inappropriate, and in some ways unlikely. But whether they're redacted records, whether they're records that simply don't exist at all, I think it begs the question of this government's commitment to conduct its business in the open and transparent methods that the member for Chilliwack Hope referred. The member from Chilliwack Hope said that he supported this bill because this was a government that was committed to transparency and openness. And frankly, Honourable Speaker, the record with respect to so many issues and so much information simply doesn't bear that out. If that was the case, there would be records. If they were records that were subject to confidentiality for a variety of legitimate reasons, the government would make that case. And ultimately, the Court of Public Opinion or the Information and Privacy Commissioner could make those decisions. Instead, we simply have records that are warehoused and not archived, and therefore very difficult to access, if not impossible to access, or people ask for information and they get no responsive records in return instead of actual information. Honorable Speaker, I wish people were keeping things on the bottom of their shoe, and the former Minister for Technology, Innovation and Citizen Services, the Minister for Advanced Education's dictum to them that if it was kept on the bottom of a shoe, it should be available, could actually be implemented, but apparently people have lost their shoes along with their ability to keep records. Honorable Speaker, the Information and Privacy Commissioner made a number of points with respect to this bill, but before I go into them, let me just look back into history a little bit. Other commentators besides myself have noted how it's an incredible claim that the government has no records whatsoever of any of the dozens of meetings with more than 80 people that took place along the Highway of Tears in northern BC. But the government claims there is no record. The government says no responsive records. One of the problems with this bill, Honorable Speaker, with Bill 5, is while it will digitize records, it also changes what existed in the Document Disposal Act, which provided for the possibility that someone who gets rid of government records improperly will face consequences under the Offences Act, the Provincial Offences Act, that violating the Document Disposal Act could result in charges. No longer, Honorable Speaker, once this bill passes, if it passes without amendment, the government, while at the same time proposing to digitize records, is also proposing to ensure that if somebody is actually caught, for instance, in saying that there were no records of consultations about the Highway of Tears, when in fact there are, or if someone made sure there were no records to release because they improperly destroyed or otherwise disposed of them, there could be consequences. No longer, Honorable Speaker, will that be possible under this piece of legislation, and that's just not right. If we have a law that is in the public interest, that states that people have a right to access information, and that talks about the forms of accessing that information and how information will be stored, then there should be consequences for violating that legislation, particularly legislation that is put in place to ensure that the people of this province who pay the bills for government, who pay the bills for this legislation, who pay the bills for government programs, actually have the right to know. The right to know and examine what the government that they've elected and whom they fund is doing. And this government, Honorable Speaker, has gone to incredible lengths for the last 12 years to avoid that kind of scrutiny, whether it's essentially contracting out the archiving of government material and then making it both expensive for ministries to archive it and ensuring that ministries don't have the money to do so, whether it's hiding behind private emails, whether it is using oral conversation to avoid record keeping, whether it's redacting excessively, or whether it's the most recent tactic of this government, which is to say whole classes of email correspondence are transitory and should be deleted, when the term transitory was clearly designed to relate to issues such as exchanges of information about where you might be meeting somebody for a lunch meeting or who might be invited to a meeting. The record of the meeting ultimately would show who is there. Instead, we have deputies essentially covering off the possibility that the public may get access to information about what government is doing or discussing, whether it's proper activity of government, potentially improper activity of government, the backgrounds to policy discussions, by saying, oh, by the way, all of you on my email circular here, treat all of this discussion as transitory and delete it. That's not appropriate, Honourable Speaker. It's not in the spirit of the term. It's not in the spirit of the Act. The Information and Privacy Commissioner has pointed that out on more than one occasion. The association that was set up to protect the public interest with respect to privacy has also pointed out that that's inappropriate and railed against it, as they should. As far as I know, Honourable Speaker, that is still a tool in this government's toolkit to avoid appropriate scrutiny by the people of this province. Let us go back, Honourable Speaker, some years to a variety of requests for correspondence with respect to BC Rail. And as reported by Gary Mason in the Globe and Mail in July 2009, a government lawyer had earlier said all emails from the period in which the defense is seeking records, 2001 to 2005, had been destroyed. But the Globe and Mail revealed that an affidavit was filed indicating that many of those records were ordered to be deleted during the provincial election, not before that particular election, but during that election. One more piece, Honourable Speaker, one more example of the lengths to which this government has gone over the years to avoid scrutiny in areas in which the public clearly has a public interest. People were very concerned about what was being done in their name, why it was being done, how it was being done, if it was being done in accordance with proper procedures and laws. And instead, Honourable Speaker, things were simply removed from physical presence that could be accessed. My colleague, Honourable Speaker, who spoke before me, made some reference to conversations that took place with the former Minister for Citizen Services and Open Government, Ben Stewart. And the Information and Privacy Commissioner in March of 2013 made a number of points to do with the increase in no responsive records to access for information requests. She made that in a letter dated March 18, 2013. She made some reports. This was to do with the recommendation she made in her report, Increase in No Responsive Records to General Access to Information Requests, Government of British Columbia. She notes that she recommended that government create a legislative duty within the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act to document key decisions as a clear indication that it does not endorse oral government, in quotation marks, oral government, and that it is committed to be accountable to citizens by creating an accurate record of its actions. The member for Nanaimo North Cowichan spoke at length about this, at length about the duty to document that does not exist in BC legislation and is not part of this act, and it should be, or this bill. It should be. If this government was truly committed to transparency, as the member for Chilliwack Hope indicated, this government would respond to the repeated requests by the Information and Privacy Commissioner, repeated requests by the public, repeated requests by the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Association for there to be a duty to document. Because if the people of British Columbia, Honourable Speaker, have a right to open government, have a right to know, have a right as enshrined in the legislation to review documents to do with government business subject only to some very specific exemptions, then there should be a duty to document. Whether it is, as the Minister of Advanced Education once said, a record kept on the bottom of a shoe, whether it's a private email, whether it is an email on government business, or whether it is a conversation. There should be documentation, because without documentation, Honourable Speaker, the public is frustrated in their legal right to access information. What good, Honourable Speaker, is a Freedom of Information Act absent the information? It's empty. It's meaningless. And frankly, Honourable Speaker, I would argue that it is contemptuous of taxpayers. If this government is doing the right thing, let it be proud of what it is doing. If it believes its policy decisions can withstand scrutiny, let those be scrutinized. Let the rationales for those policy decisions be scrutinized. Let them be scrutinized by the media, whose job it is to commentate on those decisions. Let it be scrutinized by the public, in whose name the decisions are being taken and who pay the bills. And let it be scrutinized by the official opposition and independent members of the legislature who are, under our British parliamentary system, charged with holding the government to account. We're not charged to come here and do nothing. We're not charged to come here and put on a show and question period. We're charged to hold the government account because the British parliamentary system is built on the premise that government functions best if their feet are being held to the fire by an effective opposition. And I'm sure when the Liberal government was in opposition, when the members were in opposition, Honourable Speaker, they believed that. They certainly acted as if they believed that. And to do that, one needs information. Government needs to act in an open and transparent manner. So the Commissioner went on to say that the idea behind the recommendation was that government should entrench in legislation a requirement for public bodies to document the decisions, actions, advice, recommendations, and deliberations of their officials. And the duty to document would include requirements for the securing and preservation of records in the custody of a public body. The Commissioner went on to speak at some length about the whole concept of transitory records. She said it was important that there be regulations that clarified the concept of transitory records so that substantive records were preserved. They couldn't simply be eliminated by a government deciding it was inconvenient to have them be accessible and therefore calling them transitory as a rationale for deleting them. She went on to say that the use of personal email accounts should be limited in the conduct of government business, but perhaps it would be all right, Honourable Speaker, given the comment when he was the minister responsible by the Minister of Advanced Education that it didn't matter if it was a personal email, didn't matter if it was on a napkin, didn't matter if it was in the bottom of a shoe, it was government business and subject to release under Freedom of Information. It does make me wonder, Honourable Speaker, if some of the information on the bottom of shoes was transitory, exactly what happened to the footwear. Finally, Honourable Speaker, the Commissioner issued a challenge to the government and said, government can demonstrate leadership in this field by committing to a modern information management regulatory regime of which a duty to document is a key element. It would be a new and important step towards improving accountability, transparency, good governance, and good government, and it would enhance public trust and confidence in elected officials and the public service. Honourable Speaker, those seem like worthy goals. We should all in this House want to rebuild public trust in governance and government. To do otherwise would be cynical. It would enhance the trend that is so unfortunate that people have so little regard for whether the processes of decision-making by elected officials are above board, transparent, and accountable, that they have chosen in many instances to simply forego voting. Forego voting, a right that people fought for, a right that many people's parents and grandparents, including my own, either didn't have or had removed from them at some point, a right that people around the world give their lives for and which we sanctimoniously say we support, that we should be promoting democracy around the world. If that's true, Honourable Speaker, if we really wish to promote democracy around the world, then we should understand what underpins democracy here in Canada and British Columbia. And that is transparency, trust, accountability, and openness. And any actions by government that undermine these are inappropriate, and we should all, in this House, strive to do better. I would challenge the Minister, through you, Honourable Speaker, I would challenge the Minister to consider in Bill 5, to consider including in Bill 5 a duty to document, to tell the people of British Columbia that except for necessarily confidential information that truly is proprietary or necessary for contracts, or truly confidential information from cabinet discussions that would prejudice in some way public business by being revealed, that everything else is in fact accessible in a timely and appropriate manner. I'll simply go back, Honourable Speaker, to what the previous Information Commissioner, David Lucadelis, said in 2009. I am concerned that the public policy objectives of openness, accountability, and good management, and frankly, the historical record, are not being well served at this time. That's a pretty damning comment by the former Commissioner, Honourable Speaker. It's not one for which any government should be proud, whether it's the failure to keep records, whether it's inappropriately labeling some records as transitory, whether it's trying to hide from disclosure of important policy discussions by using private emails, or whether it is storing huge numbers of documents in boxes, off-site, and failing to provide for their proper archiving and therefore accessibility to release. All of these, Honourable Speaker, point to a failure by this government, to take people's right to access information seriously, to take the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act seriously, to put in place measures that would reassure the people of British Columbia that the information about the inner workings of government is accessible to them on a reasonable basis, in a reasonable time frame, at a reasonable cost, accessible to the media so they can do their job, accessible to all members of this legislature so we can do our jobs, which is to represent the interests of the people who sent us here. Honourable Speaker, there is much to commend in this bill. It does modernize record keeping, and it will going forward, one hopes. But it could and should be better. It should deal with issues like inappropriate use of the term transitory with respect to information. It should deal with the how many boxes are currently stored? 33,000 boxes that need to be archived, that have not been archived, that have piled up since this government chose to ship all the records to the Royal BC Museum without any resources whatsoever to archive them, and without providing ministries the dollars to pay the fee. This bill does not address that. It does not address a duty to document. It does not address the inappropriate use of the term transitory as an excuse for deleting emails, and it doesn't address in any way whatsoever the inappropriate actions of far, far too many working for or in this government to hide what they have been doing from the eyes of the opposition, the media, and the public. So, Honourable Speaker, the Information and Privacy Commissioner has made many recommendations, including one that would not set up an independent officer to oversee record keeping, but would give that responsibility to her, because she is also responsible for information and privacy.
And noting
That
the
should
hour?
be included. Honorable Speaker, I will wind up my remarks, and noting the hour, I move adjournment of the debate.